The night was unusually quiet. The kind of quiet that makes every breath feel twice as loud. The hallway lights spilled a faint glow into the room, but everything else was taken by the darkness. Soft, peaceful, almost sacred. I sat beside his bed, listening to the slow, fragile beeping of the monitor, each sound reminding me how close we were to the end. He reached for my hand with surprising strength. His fingers were cold, thin, trembling, not from fear, but from something deeper, something he had carried for far too long. He waited until the nurse stepped out, until the door clicked shut, until the silence felt safe enough for truth. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Doctor, I never told anyone this," he said, eyes drifting toward the ceiling as if he could see a memory there. "And now I regret it more than anything." I nodded gently, encouraging him without a single word. Some people need permission to open the doors they've kept locked their entire lives. He swallowed hard. "My brother, I never forgave him, not before he died." His voice cracked. "We stopped talking over something stupid. Pride, maybe. Anger. Years went by, and then he was gone. I thought I had more time. I always thought I'd fix it tomorrow." A tear slid down the side of his face, disappearing into the pillow. He didn't wipe it. He couldn't. "He asked for me, near the end. But I didn't go. I told myself it didn't matter anymore. I told myself he would have done the same. But now," he stopped to breathe, a painful, shallow inhale. "Now I realize I was wrong." His fingers tightened around mine, as if trying to hold on to the last thread of life or forgiveness. "My biggest sin wasn't what I said, but what I never said." The monitor beeped slower, softer, fading like a memory slipping away. His last breath came quietly, almost like a sigh of release, but the weight of his words stayed in the room long after his chest fell still. I felt them settle inside me, heavy and honest. It was in that silence, cold, final, fragile, that I understood something I had forgotten in the rush of medical charts and routines. A secret can outlive a body, but regret never dies quietly. I met her just after sunset, when the sky outside the window held that fading orange glow you only see at the end of long days. She was sitting upright in her bed, thin shoulders trembling slightly beneath the blanket. Her name was Margaret, and she carried her pain with the elegance of someone who had learned to hide it for decades. When I entered, she didn't smile. She simply looked at me with eyes that had already decided it was time. "Doctor," she whispered softly, "can you sit for a moment? I don't think I have many left." I pulled a chair beside her, the same way I had done for so many others, but something about her expression told me this night would stay with me forever. She clasped her hands together, trying to steady them. "I need to confess something. Not for me, for the woman I used to be." Her breath trembled as she continued. "I promised my husband on the last night he was alive that I would take care of our daughter, that I would never let her feel alone." Tears gathered at the corner of her eyes, but I broke that promise. I remained silent, letting her guide the moment. When he died, I collapsed inside. I went through the motions, work, chores, gatherings, but I wasn't really there. My daughter grew up watching a mother who was half alive. I thought she was strong enough to understand, but children don't understand absence. They feel it. She looked down at her fragile hands. I missed recitals, birthdays, conversations she needed me for.
not because I didn't love her, but because grief had locked me away. I thought I had time to make it up to her. She inhaled sharply, fighting a sob. But now she barely visits. She calls out of obligation, not love. And I can't blame her. Her voice broke, raw and human. My husband trusted me with the one thing that mattered most to him, and I failed. I failed them both. I reached out, resting my hand gently on hers. It was all I could offer, but she squeezed back with surprising strength. "I'm not afraid of dying," she whispered. "I'm afraid of leaving my daughter with the same silence I gave her." The room fell quiet then, so quiet that the beeping of the monitor sounded like a heartbeat trying to hold itself together. She looked toward the window, toward the dimming sky. If you ever meet someone lost in grief, remind them that the living still need them. Pain is real, but so is love, and love is the only thing that shouldn't wait. Her breathing slowed, but her eyes stayed open, as though fearing closing them meant losing her chance to finally be heard. When I stood to leave, she whispered one last sentence. "Tell her I tried, even if it was late." And in that moment, I realized that some confessions aren't about forgiveness. They're about finally telling the truth before time takes the voice away.
He was one of my quieter patients, a man in his 70s with silver hair and eyes that always seemed to be searching for something far beyond the walls of the hospital. His name was Thomas. He rarely spoke unless spoken to, but he always greeted me with a polite nod, as if respect was the last thing he still owned. The night of his confession, rain tapped softly against the window. The room smelled faintly of medicine and the mint tea the nurses always brought him before bed. When I entered, he was sitting awake, clutching a small envelope with both trembling hands. "Doctor," he said, voice gravely but steady, "I think it's time I tell someone the truth. I don't want to die with this in my chest." I sat down. He unfolded the envelope slowly, like it contained a lifetime, which, in a way, it did. "I wrote this letter 40 years ago, to my son." His eyes glistened, and he didn't try to hide it. He was 16 when he left home. We fought over everything: school, friends, his future, even the way he talked back to me. I thought being strict meant being a good father. I thought he'd understand one day. He let out a trembling breath. One night, he told me he hated me, and I told him to leave if he felt that way. So he did. The door closed behind him, and I never saw him again. His voice cracked, quiet, controlled, but deeply wounded. I wrote this letter the next morning, apologizing, telling him I didn't mean it, asking him to come home. He gently brushed the envelope with his fingers, but I never sent it. I leaned forward. Why not? He looked at me with a pain so old it had grown roots. Pride, fear, stubbornness. I kept waiting for the right moment, for him to return first, for life to give me a sign. But days turned into years and years into decades, and now his voice faded. I don't even know if he's alive. The rain outside grew heavier, almost as though the sky wanted to weep for him. He continued, "I read this letter every year on his birthday. Sometimes I rewrite it, thinking someday I'll be brave enough.
but I never was. He handed me the envelope with shaking hands. "Do you want me to read it?" I asked softly. He shook his head. "No. I want you to understand something, Doctor." His voice steadied, gaining a heartbreaking clarity. "Silence is the longest kind of regret, and waiting for the perfect moment is how people lose the only moment they had." He pressed the letter to his chest. "If there's another life after this one," he whispered, "I hope I find him there. And I hope he lets me say the words I should have said when his heart was still within reach." His breathing grew shallow. The grip on the envelope loosened. But the pain, his pain, sat in the room long after his eyes closed. It was then I realized, some confessions aren't about guilt. They're about the hope that truth might reach the person we failed to love in time.
She was one of the most dignified patients I ever cared for. Always neatly combed hair, soft perfumes that reminded me of old gardens, and a smile that stayed even when the pain grew unbearable. Her name was Helen. She had an elegance that time couldn't steal, but her eyes told the truth she didn't dare to speak. That evening, the lights in her room were dim, just enough to outline her silhouette under the blanket. She asked the nurse to leave us alone, something she had never done before. When I sat beside her, she folded her hands tightly, as if preparing herself for a battle she had avoided for years. "Doctor," she whispered, "I need to confess something that has lived inside me longer than any illness." I nodded gently. "It's about my youngest son, the one everyone thinks was my favorite." Her voice trembled, just a little, but enough to reveal the weight behind her words. "He wasn't my favorite. He was the one I feared losing the most." She paused, letting the silence breathe with her. "When he was 12, she said softly, "he told me he felt different, lost, like he didn't fit in anywhere. He didn't have the words yet, but I knew what he was trying to say." Her eyes filled with tears, but she refused to blink them away. "And I told him to keep it quiet, to hide it, to be careful." Her voice broke. "I told my own child to be ashamed of who he was." I felt a heaviness settle in my chest. I thought I was protecting him. I thought the world would be cruel, and I wanted him safe, but I became the first person who hurt him, the first person who taught him fear. She wiped one tear, the rest falling freely. "He grew up trying to disappear, trying not to disappoint me, trying not to be himself. We never talked about it again. Never." Her breathing grew heavy, and that silence built a wall between us, a wall I created. She looked at me then with an expression I will never forget, grief mixed with clarity. "He visits me, you know. Kind, patient, gentle. He thinks I don't see the distance, but I do. I feel it every time he forces a smile that doesn't reach his eyes." She took a shaky breath and continued, "My illness, it isn't what scares me. What scares me is dying before telling him the truth, before saying that I was wrong, that I should have protected him from the world, not from himself." She turned her gaze toward the ceiling, tears streaming without resistance. "I hope one day he forgives me. I hope he knows I loved him more than my own fear. But love without courage..." She closed her eyes briefly. Love without courage wounds the people we cherish the most. I placed my hand on hers. She squeezed it, weak but full of meaning. "He first protected himself," she whispered. "If you see him, tell him his mother was proud. Tell him I'm sorry I didn't say it sooner." Her voice faded, but her confession lingered in the room like a fragile note refusing to disappear. And in that moment, I understood. The deepest regrets often come from the love we were too afraid to show.
He arrived on our ward on a cold morning, the kind of morning that makes even the walls feel tired. His name was Samuel. He carried himself with a strange mix of stubborn pride and quiet exhaustion, as though he had spent a lifetime pretending he didn't feel anything. For days he said very little, but his eyes, dark, restless, wounded, held stories waiting for a moment fragile enough to release them. That moment came late one evening, long after visiting hours had ended. The rain outside hit the window like impatient fingers. Samuel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his breath uneven. When I checked on him, he motioned for me to sit. "I'm not afraid of dying," he said abruptly, surprising me. "I'm afraid of the life I wasted." He turned his head toward me, his jaw tight, as though holding back the truth hurt more than the illness. "I need to tell you something, because I can't tell the one person who deserves to hear it." He hesitated, then exhaled slowly. "When I was young, stupid, selfish, I walked away from my family. I left my wife and my little boy. I wasn't ready. I thought responsibility was a prison. I convinced myself they'd be better without me." His voice cracked at the last sentence. "For years, I told myself I'd go back, that someday I'd show up, apologize, explain. But days turned into decades, and the longer I waited, the harder it became. Shame grows, you know? It grows until you start believing you don't deserve forgiveness." He rubbed his face with trembling hands. "My wife remarried. I heard she was happy. That's good. She deserved happiness. Just not the road I forced her to take." He paused, swallowing hard. "But my son," he dropped to a whisper. "He's a grown man now, has his own life. I've never seen it, never heard his voice as an adult. I wouldn't even recognize him in a crowd." His eyes glistened in the dim light. "I thought about writing him, calling, showing up on his birthday. But every time, fear stopped me. What if he hated me? What if opening that door only reopened wounds he had already healed?" He looked at me then, with a kind of desperate honesty. Running away was easy. Staying gone was cowardice. And now I'm here, at the end, and all I want is one chance to tell him that leaving was my biggest mistake, that not a single day passed without me thinking of him. The rain outside softened until it became nothing more than a whisper. I hope he grew up strong. I hope he had good people around him. And if he ever wonders why I left, tell him it wasn't because I didn't love him. It was because I didn't know how to love myself. His breath shook as he closed his eyes. I wish I had tried. God, I wish I had tried. Silence filled the room, a silence so heavy it felt like part of his confession.
His chest rose and fell slowly, each breath thinner than the one before. As I watched him drift into sleep, I realized something painfully true. Some goodbyes last a lifetime, and some fathers spend their whole life trying to return to a moment they never should have left.
His name was Raphael, a strong man once, broad shoulders, calloused hands, a voice that could fill any room. Even age hadn't taken that presence from him, but illness had. By the time he arrived at our ward, he looked like a memory of who he had been, his strength carved down to bone and breath. Yet every nurse liked him. He joked, he encouraged, he pretended the pain didn't matter. He was the kind of patient who tried to make us feel better. But I could see the truth behind his eyes. Strength is sometimes just fear in disguise. One night, close to dawn, he asked me to sit beside him. His voice was softer than usual, stripped of humor. "Doc," he whispered, "I've spent my whole life pretending I wasn't afraid of anything. Now I'm afraid of everything." I stayed quiet. Sometimes silence is the only door someone needs to walk through. He continued, eyes fixed on the window where the first hint of morning rested behind the clouds. "I grew up poor, no father, a mother who worked herself to the bone. I learned early that the world didn't care about my feelings, so I decided I wouldn't care either. I built myself out of toughness. I provided for my family. I protected everyone." He paused. "But I never let anyone protect me." His hands trembled. He clasped them together to hide it. "He had 3 daughters," he said softly, "and I loved them more than life. But I never told them, not once. I thought showing affection made me weak. I thought being strict made me strong. I never hugged them, never said I was proud, never let them see anything except control." He took a shallow breath. "They grew up and left home as soon as they could. They visit, yes, but there's a distance, a carefulness, as if they're standing near a fire that once burned them." His eyes filled with tears he didn't wipe away. "I wish I had been a softer man. I wish I had shown them that strength isn't silence. Strength is love you're brave enough to express." He looked at me, and his voice trembled for the first time. "I'm dying, Doc, and for the first time in my life, I'm not ashamed to say it scares me. I'm scared of the pain, of the dark, of disappearing before I say the things I should have said every day." His chest rose, fell, struggled. "But mostly, I'm scared they'll only remember the hardness, not the heart behind it." I reached out, placing my hand on his forearm. He didn't hide the fact that he needed the touch. He closed his eyes and breathed slowly, as if gathering the last pieces of himself. "Tell them," he whispered, voice breaking. "Tell my girls their father loved them. Tell them it was the strongest truth I ever had, and the only one I never learned how to speak." The monitor beeped softly, slow, uneven, fading. As dawn finally broke, a faint pale light filled his room. Raphael exhaled one last time, a breath that sounded almost like release, like a truth finally freed from the prison of a lifetime.
and I understood then. Sometimes the bravest confession is simply admitting that strength without tenderness is another form of fear.